Anamorphic lenses have had quite a resurgence over the past few years. What used to be a rare and expensive find is now both accessible and affordable, with some lenses as low as a couple of $100. But you might be asking yourself, what makes anamorphic lenses so special in the first place? Or can't you recreate those effects with normal lenses? Today, we're going to dive into the characteristics that make anamorphic lenses so iconic in the film industry with a few of DZO's PAVO series 2x anamorphic lenses. But first, let's go over a brief history of anamorphic lenses. They first became popular in the 1950s as a means of enticing audiences to go back to movie theaters. The appeal was that anamorphic lenses captured a wider field of view that could only be experienced in the movie theater. They achieved this by compressing the width of the image without affecting its height. From the 1950s to the 90s, this was the most popular method for capturing film because it created those 2.66, 2.35, and 2.39 to 1 aspect ratios that we associate with cinema. By the 90s, however, anamorphic lenses decreased in popularity. Many filmmakers preferred spherical lenses because they're much easier to shoot with and typically sharper. Thus, anamorphic lenses died in popularity, at least temporarily. Now, anamorphic lenses have become more popular than before because they feature unique characteristics that can't be recreated with spherical lenses. These qualities may be considered flaws if your goal is to perfectly recreate what you see in front of you, but allow for creative choices that facilitate the magic we call cinema. The first and most obvious characteristic of anamorphic lenses is the wider aspect ratio. You may have noticed that anamorphic lenses typically have a squeeze ratio, the original being 2x, but popular options are 1.8, 1.6, 1.5, 1.33, and 1.3x. These squeeze ratios control how much wider your field of view will be compared to the camera's recording aspect ratio. As a warning, this next part involves math. If you're recording on a Panasonic S5 II in the anamorphic 4x3 recording mode, like we are today, then the 2x DZO PAVO anamorphic lens will capture double the width, resulting in a 2.66 to 1 aspect ratio. The squeeze factor has a ton of control over the field of view that will be achieved with your lens. The next and probably most iconic characteristic of anamorphic lenses are the lens flares. Anamorphic lenses typically have a horizontal streak-like lens flare. The flares are known for being dramatic and sometimes even take unique colors depending on the coating. DZO, for example, offers their lenses in two coatings, one for a neutral colored lens flare and a second with an orange bias. Now let's compare it to a spherical lens flare. We have our hands on one of DZO's VESPID retro lenses. As you can see, these lenses also flare very easily, but the shape of the flare is different. Next up is the bokeh. Spherical lenses typically have round bokeh, but anamorphic lenses create an elliptical bokeh. The next few characteristics also appear in spherical lenses, but are typically more exaggerated in anamorphic lenses. First is distortion. Anamorphic lenses typically have more barrel distortion than spherical lenses. Anamorphic lenses are also typically softer than spherical lenses, have more dramatic focus fall off towards the edges, and vignetting. Now, these past few characteristics will vary a lot between different lenses and lens series. The important thing to remember is that these qualities that I've mentioned give the lens the character that helps tell a story. For instance, the DZO PAVO lenses have an appealing blend of vintage and modern characteristics. They're pleasing on faces because they aren't clinically sharp, and therefore far more forgiving of skin blemishes and imperfections. The lens flares are dramatic without being overbearing. There's very little chromatic aberration, and they will yield a CinemaScope-like 2.66 to 1 aspect ratio on 4x3 sensors. Depending on what you're shooting, these subtle qualities of the lenses can create a feeling or a mood that can't, or at least would require a ton of work to recreate in post-production. One of the first things you should consider when shooting with anamorphic lenses is the lens mount. Originally, anamorphic lenses were only available in PL mount, as they were exclusively used for cinema production. But now you can find anamorphic lenses in all sorts of mounts. The DZO PAVO lenses, for example, ship with both PL and EF mounts. Between these two options, it's possible for filmmakers to mount or adapt these lenses to any camera system. However, filmmakers should use extra caution when swapping lens mounts. Swapping lens mounts requires users to disassemble the back of the lens and calibrate back focus using shims. If not calibrated correctly, the lens will be difficult or even impossible to focus. Thankfully, DZO also includes a back focus ring on their lenses. This allows filmmakers to adjust the back focus without disassembling the lens and replacing shims. If you'd like to learn more about lens mounts and how to adapt or swap them, let us know in the comments below. When planning a shoot with anamorphic lenses, it's also important to consider your camera's recording modes and your lens's squeeze ratio. Ideally, it's best to choose a recording mode and lens combination that will naturally produce the aspect ratio that you're looking for. For instance, some cameras allow you to record open gate, meaning using the entire sensor. However, if the sensor's aspect ratio doesn't align with the aspect ratio result that you're aiming for, then you may end up recording a lot of excess footage that you'll have to crop out later. Finding the right combination requires a bit of math, so to save you the headache, here's a list of popular recording aspect ratios and anamorphic squeeze factor combinations that will result in the most common video formats. As I alluded to before, if your lens and camera combination doesn't yield the aspect ratio you're looking for, it's not the end of the world because you can always crop it in post. Just remember that you'll be recording extra footage that you don't need, which may make it harder to visualize and compose your shot depending on your camera's monitoring settings. Unfortunately, not all cameras are optimized for filming with anamorphic lenses. Some cameras include anamorphic desqueeze modes to properly view your footage in camera. Some have frame guides to help you visualize your desired aspect ratio, and some even have dedicated anamorphic image stabilization modes. It's generally a good idea to check for these settings before selecting a camera. If your camera doesn't have any dedicated anamorphic features, then it's usually a good idea to pick up a monitor that does. Both Atomos and Blackmagic recording monitors are packed with anamorphic features, so if you're planning on shooting external or external RAW, then you're already covered. But for conventional monitors, make sure that it has anamorphic desqueeze and frame guide options in its menu. Finally, the last pre-production consideration we'll discuss today is focal length. Anamorphic focal lengths are not the same as spherical focal lengths because of how they compress the horizontal field of view. DZO's 2x anamorphic PAVO lenses, for example, have double the width of a spherical lens with the same focal length. The strength of the anamorphic squeeze factor will have a huge effect on the field of view of your focal length. Today, we have the 32, 65, 135, and 180mm focal lengths, but DZO has a wide selection ranging from 28 to 180mm. In post-production, anamorphic lenses require a few extra steps, but it's very straightforward if you're using a professional video editing software. First, set your timeline to your desired resolution and aspect ratio. Next, you have to tell the software the footage is anamorphic. In Adobe Premiere, you right-click on the clip or clips, head to Modify, then click on Interpret Footage. This will bring up a window that will allow you to select the squeeze compression under Pixel Aspect Ratio. In DaVinci Resolve, you right-click on your footage, then select Clip Attributes. Just like Adobe, you choose your squeeze factor using the drop-down under Pixel Aspect Ratio. That's it. Anamorphic footage desqueezed in all of its widescreen glory. From there on, you can edit it like any other footage. Alright, we've gone over why anamorphic lenses have become popular again and what makes them special, so the only remaining question is, can you tell the difference? We shot a jazz session featuring Gabe and Andrew using 3 cameras, 2 with anamorphic lenses and 1 with a spherical lens in 2.66:1 aspect ratio. The anamorphic lenses naturally fit the 2.66:1 aspect ratio because the PAVOs are 2x anamorphics and we recorded them in 4:3 aspect ratio on the Panasonic S5 II and GH7. The spherical lens was cropped to fit 2.66:1 so that it blends in with the other footage. Let us know which anamorphic characteristics stand out the most. As you may have guessed, camera 2 was recorded with a spherical lens. Camera 1 features some strong anamorphic characteristics. The separation between the subject and the lights in the background highlight the oval-shaped bokeh, and the lens flare has the iconic horizontal streak. On the other hand, the wide-angle characteristics are less dramatic, making it harder to discern which one is anamorphic and which one isn't. However, spherical lenses are typically sharper than anamorphic lenses, and that's certainly the case here. The DZO VESPID 25mm Retro is sharper than the PAVO 32mm. Ultimately, it comes down to creative choice. As we've just demonstrated, you don't need anamorphic lenses to achieve a wide aspect ratio, interesting lens flares, or beautiful bokeh. Spherical lenses are just as capable of doing all those things and are better at recreating images as you saw them in real life. Anamorphic lenses, on the other hand, feature characteristics that sell a feeling or an aesthetic that feels, well, cinematic. That makes them better equipped to create a surreal experience for the audience. While the process of working with them may not be for everyone, anamorphic lenses will always be favored by creative filmmakers and DPs looking to tell a story with a unique field of view. What are your thoughts on anamorphic lenses? Can you see yourself shooting your next jam session in CinemaScope? Let us know in the comments below. Special thanks to DZO for letting us use their PAVO lenses for this video. I'm Jabari from B&H. Have a magnificent day.